further now with Myles B. Caggins the Third, who's a retired colonel in the U.S. Army who served in the Pentagon and National Security Council. He was also spokesman for the global coalition to defeat ISIL in Iraq and Syria, and is joining us on Al Jazeera from Erbil in northern Iraq. Colonel, thank you so much for speaking to us. As we heard our correspondent say there, no damage assessment yet from CENTCOM. What do you know and what do you think could have been targeted here by the US, these 85 targets in Syria and Iraq? What type of damage was inflicted? Where were these high-value targets for these armed groups?
These attacks by the United States on Kataib Hezbollah and Iranian-backed militia groups had two primary purposes. One was information, sending a message to reassure Americans that we take it seriously when Iran attacks and kills our troops, and also to send a message to the militias in Iran that we, too, the United States, can reach out and strike anywhere we choose at any time of our choosing. Now, from the attacks on 7 different locations and 85 different targets, as has been released by the CENTCOM and the White House, it's clear that this was an operation to destroy storage facilities for rockets and drones, and to also eliminate some of the command and control.
But how significant were these locations, though?
The significance of these locations is that they were in an area where Kataib Hezbollah has had complete freedom of movement back and forth across the border. At the Al-Qaim location, there's a federal Iraq border crossing, a recognized border crossing, and then there is a militia-controlled border crossing where lethal aid, drugs, other contraband, and terrorist fighters flow back and forth freely.
The reason I asked about the significance of the location is because the strikes had been expected for several days now. And there are many questions about the timing and forcefulness of the U.S. response, because Biden's critics have said he could have allowed these armed groups to withdraw their assets and personnel before the strikes. President Biden's critics have said it took too long, and it took too long for the U.S. to respond. So again, what is the impact of these strikes, really, if these militias could have had time to withdraw from these positions?
Well, I know this from my experience that America is always watching the militias. We have ways to observe them from space, from the air, and using signals intercepts, and occasionally sources on the ground. The militias cannot hide from American air power, and the timing of the strikes was designed for purposes of planning targets that were agreed through the National Security Council process. What is important is that the Secretary of Defense has signaled that this is just the beginning of a campaign of strikes. And I anticipate that if Iranian militias attack again, America will respond quickly and forcefully.
I will ask you in a moment about whether this could lead to a wider conflict. But just coming back to the impact, do you really think that this response will reestablish deterrence of these groups?
Iran has sent its proxies throughout the Middle East for more than 2 decades. It is unlikely that they will be deterred with their ultimate goals. However, in the short run, they have had some quick behavioral changes. But one thing that you can trust from terrorist groups is that they will commit to their ideals, and they will continue to make attacks at the time and place of their choosing. And it's important for America and its partners, including the Iraqi security forces and Peshmerga, to stand up and resist these unlawful militias operating inside of Iraq.
You'd mentioned Iran, but the response we've heard from Iran so far has been somewhat of a low-key one, a muted one, because it's clear that they don't want to escalate this war. So, I mean, where is the U.S. taking this now? President Biden says he doesn't want to turn this into a wider regional conflict, but by launching these strikes, does it not do that?
The wider regional conflict is already underway. Your network has reported extensively about the Israeli war on Gaza and the Houthi attacks on shipping. And now we have this back and forth between Iran and the USA. in Iraq and Syria. So all leaders have said that they're wanting to de-escalate and not have a wider war. That remains to be seen because they're responsive to their critics, they're responsive to their populations, and they have a responsibility to protect their people and their interests. And in this case, it has led to airstrikes, rocket attacks, and drone attacks.
All right, Colonel, thank you so much for talking to us. Thank you for your time. Myles B. Caggins the Third, a retired colonel in the U.S. Army, joining us from Erbil in northern Iraq.